friends, it's Christy. So excited to be back with you on the Lawnfawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using You Crow Girl, Happy Harvest, Hey There Hayrides, Critters on the Farm, Spooktacular, and Jump for Joy. So I've stamped those images on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawnfawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I am going to start with my Scarecrow Girl's skin, and for that I'm using E50, E51, and E53, starting with the E53 up under her hat brim and on the sides of her little pigtails, and blending out with the E51 and then the E50. I also filled in her nose with the E53, and I'm going to do the little husks of my corn with these shades so they look like they're dried out. Then I'm going to darken up this combo just slightly by bringing in the E55 and E57 added to the E53, and I'm going to do my fence posts. So starting with the E57, I'm doing the horizontal slats down at the bottom and then the vertical slats on the right hand side. And I will also do my little sign there. The sign is from Hey There Hayrides, and you can stamp whatever phrases you want into that or leave it plain. I chose to do the pumpkins and corn maze, but there's definitely lots of different options. So I am blending out that E57 with the E55, just making sure to go over the edge of the E57 and pull that darkest color into the midtone, and then I will fill in any remaining space with that E53 so that we have a nice highlight. And I will repeat that process for the signs and the post. Then I'm going to move on to my hay, and I'm going to keep that E55 just to add a little extra depth to the combo that I'm using, which is Y21, Y26, and Y28. So I'm starting with that E55 and just adding a touch of that to all of the hay on the Scarecrow Girl and also to the hay bale. And then I'll start blending that out with the Y shade, so Y28 first. And even though those areas sticking out of her arms and her skirt are really small, I did squeeze all three of those shades in there just because I wanted the coloring to look really dynamic. So I blended out the Y28 with the Y26. And I did go over even the brown on the hay bale with that Y26 just to shift it to the more golden side of the tone. And then I'm going to blend out with the Y21 for the highlight, and the same on that hay bale. And later on, I will go back to this combo and use it for the little buckles on her overalls, but I did that off screen. I also colored in her post off screen, which I forgot to do earlier. And then I went back to my E57 and also added in some E15 because I wanted to do some little dot detail on my corn to make it look like Indian corn that has been dried out, the more decorative corn that we often use in the fall. Then I'm going to move on to some grays. I pulled out N1, N3, N5, and N7 for my crows. I ended up not using the N1 at all. I started with the N7, added some darkness around the back of their heads and the bottom of their bodies and the top of their wings. And once I have that all laid in, I will come in with the N5 and pull that color forward. I'm going to be really careful about going over their eyes. I don't want to make that area too dark so that they get lost in there. And I will go back over them with a black gel pen later on just to make them a bit more prominent. And I will also bring in that N3 and make sure that I go over the area where the N5 meets up, just so it softens that area around the eyes a little bit more, makes them more visible. And that's why I had the N1 pulled out, but I ended up just not needing it. Fun fact, these crows are one of my absolute favorite critter images from Lawnfawn. I don't know why, I just really, really love the way that they are illustrated, and anytime that I can use them on a card, I'm always so excited. And I love that we now have the little crow from You Crow Girl because it just makes it look like there's a baby, which is always fun. I colored their beaks black as well, but I wanted them to stand out and be a little bit darker so we have some contrast. So I brought in N9. So I'm just using those darkest 3 shades for the beaks, and I'll also use it for the face of my jack-o'-lantern. For the rest of my jack-o'-lantern, I'm going to go with some bright oranges. I'm using YR04, YR07, and YR09. Starting with the YR09 and laying that in around the edges where all of those little lines are drawn to indicate the grooves. And then I'll start blending out with the YR07. And then I'll keep the area around the face nice and light with that YR04 and just color really carefully around the eyes and mouth. And then I will do the little pumpkin as well. I am also coloring a few extra accessory images off screen just to save some time in the video. They didn't fit on this panel, so I stamped an additional panel that just has a few extra pumpkins, leaves, corn, and flowers. I'm using the same exact combos that I'm showing you here. So I'm moving on to some desaturated blue greens. I'm using BG93, BG96, and BG99. And I will use that for my other large pumpkin and the pumpkin stems for the orange pumpkins and also the little patch on her dress. As this card starts to come together, you'll see that I went in a very desaturated color palette for this card. I wanted to go with a little bit more of like a creepy fall theme. Not really creepy, just like when the mist is rolling in and it just gets a little bit of that spook factor going on. And then I wanted the orange pumpkins to be like the bright splash of color on the scene, but I didn't want too much of it. So that's why I did some of the pumpkins in the duller green shade. Then I'm moving on to her overalls, and I'm using B91, B93, B95, and B97. So I'm starting with the B97 and just defining the edges and the waistband, and then pulling that color in with the B95. Then I'll come in with that B93. I'm going to fill in the straps and the area around the pocket and most of the skirt of the little dress as well. And I just saved a little bit of extra room for the highlight on the top of the pocket and the front of the dress for that B91. And then I wanted that color to appear somewhere else in the scene. I always like to use a color at least twice on a card. So I decided to do her hat band to match. So I just started on the outside edges with the darkest, the B97, and blended toward the center. Then I'm going to switch to a more desaturated orange for her shirt. And I'm using YR12, YR14, and YR18. Starting with the YR18 down at the bottom, and then I'm also going to do her little ponytail holders to match, blending up with the YR14, and then I'm going to fill in with the YR12. And I am going to add a pattern to this, so I let it dry for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then I kept the YR18 and brought in E15. So with that YR18, I'm going to do some vertical stripes, and then I'm going to do a horizontal stripe as well. And then in the space between those stripes, I'm going to add some with the E15. So just real quick and easy, and it just adds a nice little subtle detail that I think looks really cozy around the fall, especially with the plaid. I also colored in the center of my flower with the YR18, and then I'm moving on to a different brown for her hat. I'm using E43, E44, and E47, again going for those more desaturated shades, adding the E47 on the outer edges, blending out with the E44, and then I'll use that E43 to fill in so we have a nice highlight on the top of the hat and also on the center of the brim. And then I did one of the leaves to match as well, so we have that color up here in another area on the card. And then I'm going to do the larger leaf in a little bit of a brighter yellow. It matches with the hay, but it's just a little bit brighter so it stands out against it, using Y31, Y35, and Y38. And for the flower, I wanted something just a little unexpected, so I went with purple using V22, V25, and V28. Then I took a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that going off to the side and went over the eyes of my crows like I mentioned earlier. Again, that just makes them nice and bright and shiny and helps them to stand out a bit more. And I also went over my Scarecrow girl and then trimmed these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I started by trimming down a piece of Bristol cardstock with the largest of the small stitch rounded rectangle stackables. And then I took the moon die from the Spooktacular stamp set and trimmed out a piece of masking paper. And I am going to place that in the top left corner and then just press that down into place. And then I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. The first shade I'm going to use is Speckled Egg. And I will start blending that into my sky, just making sure that that mask is fully pressed down so that I get a nice outline when I peel it off. So I'll just continue adding that to the top portion of the card. I'm going to go down about 2/3 of the way toward the bottom and just keep blending that on. I want it to be a little bit darker on the outside edges and softer in the center, and especially in that left corner, a little bit softer where that moon is. Then I'll bring in my next shade, which is going to be Hickory Smoke. And I just want to darken up that sky and make it a little bit more hazy, a little bit more kind of in that spooky vibe. Not super spooky because it's definitely still a fall card and not Halloween, but it's right around that time of year that I'm going for. So I'm adding in a little bit of that gray, just desaturating that blue even more, and then I'll go back with the speckled egg and just blend over the transition areas between those. Then I wanted to darken that up even further, but I want to be really cautious with this. So I'm going to bring in black soot, but I'm actually not going to even ink up my ink blending tool. I'm just using what was left over on that tool from my previous use and just adding a little bit of that to the corners and then blend it out. And then I'm going to flip this panel over and start using the scattered straw for the ground. And I am going to blend that into this speckled egg. I want the background to be a little bit undefined, like a really misty evening toward dusk when the moon is just starting to peep out and the stars are just appearing in the sky. Then I'll add in a little bit of shabby shutters at those corners just so we have kind of a fade from a soft olive green into that golden tone. And then I'm also adding a little bit of the black soot blending tool on there as well, again without actually inking it up, and then just going back over those transition areas. Then I'm going to peel off my mask to reveal the moon. And I wanted to add just a little bit of color in that empty space. So I'm using my scattered straw blending tool, just adding a few little pounces of color onto the inner rim of that. Then I'm going to take the cornstalk image from Hey There Hayrides and I'm going to stamp this on the background using some Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink because I just want it to be a soft, hazy silhouette. If you wanted to use a larger one, you can use the one from Happy Harvest, but I kind of wanted this to be smaller and kind of looking more in the distance, so that's why I chose the smaller of the two options here. And I am just stamping that in a row on the left-hand side. I wanted it to look like the field was off to the left because that's going to be indicated by the sign that I made with my stamps. And then I just stamped some in between those to make it look a bit more full. And then I'm taking some of this pearl shade of the Gansai Tambi Starry colors, and I am tapping that onto the background with a thin paintbrush so that we do have some of those soft, hazy looking stars. So once I'm done with that, I will set this panel aside to dry, and then I will pop it in my MISTI so I can add my sentiment. I don't have a ton of room for a sentiment on today's card, so I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just using Hey There from the Hey There Hayrides, and then the sentiment will continue onto the inside of the card. I am going to use a kraft card base, and I will stamp on the inside using walnut ink. And I'm going to use the little trio of pumpkins and then the sentiment that says, "Hope your day is filled with fun," which can go for a multitude of different occasions. So I thought that would be a fun one. So I am going to move on now to some pattern paper. I am using some from the Falling Leaves 6x6. I'm going to go with this soft kind of grayish gingham print, and I'll trim that down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables. I'll glue that to the front of my card base with the glue tube, just squeezing those corners together so that I know I have it on there straight. And then I'm going to pop up the focal panel with some foam tape so that my card has a bit of dimension on it. And then I can bring in my images. So I'm going to take my scarecrow girl and I'm going to lay her on the card. I'm not going to adhere her just yet, but I need to have her there as a placeholder so I can figure out the scene around her. So first I'm going to add this hay bale and just tuck that behind her toward the right. It's kind of balancing out the cornfield on the left. And then I am going to take this fence from the Critters on the Farm and I will add that to the right of her. And then I'll also take the sign that is pointing to the pumpkins and the cornfield. And then once I had that on there, I just wanted to slide things a little bit more toward the right to make sure that they were spaced out a bit more evenly. So thankfully that glue doesn't dry super fast and I was able to adjust those things as needed. And then I'm going to start with my pumpkins and figure out how I want to have all of these laid out. I have two of the larger pumpkins plus the jack-o'-lantern, and then I have a couple of small pumpkins as well. So once I have the larger pumpkins figured out, I can start adhering those down into place. I'm going to have one of the green ones over next to the jack-o'-lantern just so I don't have two large orange pumpkins right next to each other. I like to spread that color around the scene a bit more. I'll take one of the small pumpkins, I'll take the green one and add that to the opposite side to balance out the orange pumpkin on the left. And then again, I just wanted to make a few more adjustments and add one of the smaller pumpkins kind of between the two larger ones just to break up the shapes there. So I added that over on the left, and then I have the little corn, the Indian corn that I'm going to place down on the far left. And then I'll take the other two and I will place those over on the right hand side. So since we have two larger pumpkins on the left, I'm kind of balancing that out by adding a few of the extra smaller images over on the right. Before I go any farther, I want to adhere my scarecrow girl, just adding her to the right of that sentiment up toward the top of the card. And then I want to have one of the crows flying in from the right-hand corner, kind of balancing out the moon. And then I have a few of these little accessory images like leaves and things that I'm just going to start tucking into the scene. I'm going to add one of the leaves to her hat band, and then I'll place a flower over top of that just to add a little extra of that fall touch. And then I have a crow that I'm going to place on the fence. and another crow is going to go down toward the bottom of the scene there, but I decided that I wanted to add another pumpkin first because I hadn't added that yet. So I pulled up the green pumpkin to shift that over a little bit further, and then I'm going to add the orange pumpkin in between, and then I will add a leaf to kind of break up those two oranges being right next to each other. That third large crow is going to go in the space between the two groupings of pumpkins, but right now I'm just going to leave him there as a placeholder again while I figure out the baby crow, which I decided to have standing on the stem of the large pumpkin on the right, and then I adhered that larger crow in the center. And then I'm just going to go ahead and embellish with a few more of these little images. I wanted to have a leaf kind of blowing in the wind up in the sky. I added another one back behind the baby crow toward the hay bale there, and just to give it a little bit more height in that area. And then I wanted to add the extra flowers kind of scattered throughout the pumpkins. So I added one on the left, and I'm going to have two on the right, but this other one I'm going to tuck up toward the hay bale. And then I looked for a place to add these other two leaves, but I just didn't really find a place for them. I thought about tucking it into the fence line, but it was covering up too much of the cornfield, and I really wanted that to show, so I just decided to leave them off the scene. I'm going to add a little bit of glitter to finish this card up. I added it to the centers of the flowers. I dotted it onto the Indian corn, and I also added it to all of my leaves. And then I also wanted to just add a bit of that to the moon to really make it look like it was glowing. So I'm going to place that on the left side of the moon, just adding a little bit of sparkle there as well. And that is going to finish up this card, so I will lift that up so you can see all of the detail, give it a tip so you can see all of that shimmer and shine, and of course give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was definitely very different for me regarding the color palette, but I really enjoyed how it turned out, and I hope that you do too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!